My sister said that my rich doctor fiancé and baby had set him up years ago, and now that he had failed in surgery, she begged me to save his career, even offering to help in return. This is the story of my sister Carol. Well, I'm going to call her by her real name because who cares? There's no better way to put it. But yes, Carol seduced my fiancé because she felt that he was too handsome and rich for an unattractive girl like her. She thought he deserved someone beautiful, so she offered herself up, and the idiot married her. It was good for them because I got rid of a cheater and found someone who really deserves me. Please bear with me, this is going to be a long one because it goes back 15 years when I was in my 20s, and now I'm 41. Carol is 6 years younger than me and has the complete opposite personality. She's the kind of girl who gets the most attention at all family and social gatherings. She made sure from an early age that she was headed in the right direction, and she focused more on dressing up and hanging out with friends. There's no doubt that she's beautiful, gorgeous, as you would say, and she's proud of it. She doesn't let any opportunity to show off her superficiality pass her by and despises those who don't meet her standards of beauty. Like me. She is always critical of my taste in clothes and mocks me for not being popular as a child. I preferred academics, so I was often seen with my books and comics instead of doing my Barbie's makeup. I didn't even have a Barbie Carol and never shared a sisterly bond with her. She considered herself a fashionista, while I was just a plain-looking girl, as she called me. She had a point. I was a simple person who didn't like ostentation or attention. I was calm and liked being alone. I felt incredibly relieved when I left home for high school. Who wants to live in the privileged class like Brad? My life was quite interesting during my busy studies at medical school. I used to go home during the holidays or spring break, and I shortened the trip when I was 2 years old. My relationship with Carol gradually improved because we saw each other so rarely. Carol dropped out of high school and worked in the fashion industry. Then she dropped out of fashion school and worked as a model. Until I got in touch with her, she had 2 projects for a local clothing brand photographed over a period of 5 years. I don't know if we can call it a successful modeling career, as she often mentioned. If you think I'm mean, please wait a moment. After I moved out of the house, the resentment between Carol and me gradually subsided. We meet twice a year for a few days. She doesn't get enough chances to annoy me, so we get along fine during my first year at university. I meet Smith, who is much older than me, and I'm in my first year of undergraduate studies. Besides, he has several years of experience as a resident doctor, and he specializes in cardiology, which is one of the most prestigious specialties. The icing on the cake was that he was good-looking. He often gave freshman classes on the circulatory system, which earned him a little extra money and refreshed his knowledge. He was popular for his easy-to-understand teaching style, and even more so with the girls, because who wouldn't want to take a class from a blue-eyed, 6 feet 2 inches, well-proportioned, fit senior? I studied under him too, and eventually started dating him in my last year of college. After dating him for 4 years, he proposed to me. I had no reason to refuse. At that time, he was already working in a hospital. When I went home for the holidays, my mother saw the ring on my hand and asked me during the happy moment. I told her everything. She jumped with excitement because I had never taken anyone seriously, and Smith was the first man I had dated or had sex with. My mother asked me for details about Smith because she smelled the card of our marriage. Carol often said that I would never find a good man to marry me. Well, she met a rich and handsome man. Whenever she knew that I was dating a man, she would say, "He will definitely run away. Your relationship won't even last a week." So when Carol knew Smith, her eyes lit up and she wanted to know more about him. She was interested in my life, which was a bit unusual, because my life had always been pretty boring. I asked her why she wanted to know about him, and she said that he would become family, so I should get to know him. Mom asked me to call him for dinner on New Year's Eve. Later I learned that Carol had asked my mother to invite Smith. We didn't have any plans that year, so Smith agreed to join us. When we arrived home, Carol greeted us, which was a big surprise because Carol was a party animal. She was never home on weekends and during the New Year's holiday, but this time she was home, which was amazing and should have been shocking, but I didn't bother about it. I didn't care about other people's lives. I went home with Smith, and my sister fell in love with Smith at first sight. Her first words were, "I thought you were rich." But you're also very handsome. Her frivolous attitude was obvious, right in my face, but I ignored it. Throughout the evening, I was at ease with our relationship. She made advances to him, praising him unreservedly, touching his arm and thigh unnecessarily, and forcing conversations with him. She sat next to him at the table. I glanced at her and she made a cute pout and said, "You can sit with him every day today. I can be his candy." Everyone laughed, and we took it as light fun in conversation. She learned that Smith went for a walk after dinner and cleaned up after he finished eating. She offered to show him around the neighborhood. Smith looked at me while I sat expressionless, not knowing what to say. Smith answered awkwardly, "Yes." And that night they both went for a walk while we were driving back from my parents' house. Smith asked if I noticed how Carol flirted with him. I laughed and said perfunctorily that she was a show-off. I didn't think Smith would be so shallow and fall for superficial beauty, but it turned out that he did. A few months later, he had his first opportunity to cheat. I took my final year exams as usual, reducing my video chats with him and focusing on my studies. Eventually, I noticed that he had also cut back on communication, and when I confronted him, he said he wanted me to focus on the final exams. I was so busy on the last day of exams that I didn't suspect anything untoward. I asked him to pick me up from school, and he said he was busy in the evening. I called him, and he said he was at home but was too tired and about to nod off. I went to his place to surprise him but found the door locked. I called him again, but he didn't answer. The next day I waited for his call, but he didn't call back. I shamelessly called him again and asked him why he lied. Last night he said he forgot to mention that he slept at his colleague's house. Stupid me didn't see the hint. How could I? This was the first time I'd ever encountered this. This situation continued for a week until I lost my mind. Then I asked him if he wanted to break up with me. He hesitated for a few seconds and muttered, "Yes." He said he no longer loved me. That was it. That was the last time we spoke. I didn't ask what, when, or how. Heartbreak is always it's painful and has no reason. What's worse is that he made me feel insecure and self-doubting, and there were many unanswered questions. Took a few months and many bottles of single malt whiskey, but in the end I was able to move on. I'm glad he broke up with me after my final exams. Otherwise, I would have needed another year to finish medical school. 7 months later, I got a call from Carol, inviting me to her engagement ceremony. I congratulated her and asked about the man, whom she did not name, and was invited to the party to meet him in person. I was happy for her, but for a while I was sad because I was supposed to be married at that time, but after the breakup I was all alone. I tried to forget my miserable life and showed up at my sister's engagement ceremony. As soon as he entered, I saw the words Carol and Smith written on the card, which sent shivers down my spine. But I calmed myself down, thinking that the name Smith was so common that there could be another person with that name. But as I walked in, I bumped into 2 friends of Smith's, who turned around when I walked up. My heart was racing. I walked up to the podium where Carol was supposed to be sitting with her fiancé. I saw Smith sitting with her, his arm around her shoulders. I froze. I didn't know what to do. I just stood there, tears in my eyes. The next thing I remember is my mom pulling me into the corner and telling me to behave. She told me not to cause trouble there and to make everyone happy. She said no one knew our past and she wanted things to be that way. I cried out, "You knew everything and you let it happen. Carol is you are all demons, you are all in this together." Then I saw Carol coming towards me with an evil smile, just like she did 15 years ago. It was years ago, but I remember every word she said so clearly. It was the most humiliating moment of my life. She said, "You think you can make this man fall in love with Smith? He's handsome, tall, rich, and you're so ordinary you're not worthy of him. You should find someone as ordinary as you. Look how beautiful we look together, and how much people love us. My God, what a perfect couple. Everyone will laugh their heads off if they see you standing next to him." I really wanted to slap her, but my mother stopped me and told me to leave. She thought I had come to stop the engagement. She yelled at me, saying, "Why did you come here? Don't you have any self-respect?" I said I didn't know it was his engagement, and if I had known, I would never have shown up. Carol denied inviting me, and she lied to my mother and said she hadn't invited me. My mother told her not to invite me because I might get hurt, but Carol deliberately invited me to deliberately humiliate me. Leaving volleyball and howling, the pain of the breakup came flooding back. To say this was difficult is an understatement. It was the most painful period of my life and the lowest point of my life. Fortunately, I graduated successfully and got a job at a hospital with intense working hours. I had little time to think about anything. I deliberately kept myself busy on my days off. Years later, I met my husband at work, who was on the board of directors of the hospital chain. We worked together for 4 years, got married, and are now the proud parents of 2 children. Fast forward to a week ago, I received a call from an unknown number. I answered the phone and the person on the other end introduced herself as Carol. Even after hearing her name, it took me a few seconds to realize that she was my sister. P.S. A few of my patients also have the name Carol. I asked her why she was calling me and she acted really sweet, asking about my life and the Carol I knew, sparing no effort to help me without any motive. I said cut the crap and say what you want. She was silent for a while and said that actually I needed help. My husband Smith was in trouble, a patient had an allergic reaction after surgery, and the hospital might fire him. I said what could I do? She said that Smith worked in a chain hospital, and a member of the board of this hospital was my husband, so that my husband could save him from any harsh punishment. I was already distracted. I told her not to call me again and that we would not help them. I didn't know that Smith and I worked for the same hospital, and that he worked in another location. I looked up at the hospital's employee entrance and found Smith, but his current status showed as suspended. I wanted to discuss this with my husband, but I didn't want to dredge up my past, so I just let it go. 2 days ago, my mother appeared at my doorstep, looking like a ghost. I changed the subject, because on the day Carol got engaged, she hugged me and cried, saying it was wonderful to see me after all these years. But I knew that the real motive behind all her sweetness was to save Smith's job at the SS. My husband was at home at the time and heard his mother pleading for help for her golden son-in-law. My husband said that Smith had been accused of medical negligence and was currently under investigation. He said that he, even if he could, would not do this, and that he would not abuse his position for personal gain. Yesterday, my mother walked away without saying a word with her lips pursed. My husband came home from work and said that the investigation into Smith was over and that he would be fired, but that my husband had the right to let him keep his medical license, but with a huge fine. He said that he could ask the other board members to take action against Smith and not send his case to the state medical department for further investigation. Now I'm in a dilemma. Should I forget the humiliation and help Smith, or should I make him pay for his actions? I mean, as a doctor, I know how hard it is to get a medical degree, and losing your license is the worst thing that can happen to a doctor. Update. There's no need to post here and seek your opinions on what Carol and my mother did after that day. It has already shown that they don't deserve any help and they are nothing but narcissists. Carol and my mother have been verbally abusing me on social media. I rarely use Facebook this week, and when I opened it, I found that I was tagged in a few posts by Carol, where she called me a revenge seeker for setting her husband up. She wrote a long post saying that I was jealous of her because Smith abandoned me and married her, and that I did all this to get back at her for cheating on me. My mother joined in, saying that I abused them and cut them off because I couldn't stand the idea of Smith marrying Carol. My extended family sided with them, saying that I went too far in my revenge and cut off Smith's livelihood. Even Smith said I was delusional, that he never loved me and never proposed to me, that he always loved Carol. I unfollowed them immediately and blocked them. I told my husband not to let Smith off the hook, accusing him of, in fact, the most severe punishment for each felony. Smiled at me and said he had never seen me so angry. Smith has been officially fired from the hospital, and his case has been referred to the state health department for revocation of his license. As a result, the government agency will conduct a new investigation, and if he is found guilty of the hospital's charges, he will lose his license and be sentenced to prison. As icing on the cake, we will continue to update as the situation develops. I'm now eating popcorn while watching the fun. Editor's note: a small clarification. Carol and my mom were not added to my social media accounts. The problem is that my account is public, so anyone can tag me in their posts. I didn't block them before because I wasn't on social media 15 years ago, but now they are blocked. My life updates to show just how low people will stoop, and now I know. So Smith shows up at my workplace. As I said, he works for the same hospital chain as me, but in a different location, and he pretends to be a patient and walks into my consultation room. He knows that if he comes to me, I won't see him. I immediately asked him to leave, and he said that he had already paid for the consultation and that as a doctor I should be fair to him. While I listened to him complain about his problems, I quickly turned on the recorder on my phone. I did this so that he could no longer set me up, and fortunately I did it. He pretended to have the flu, but was actually faking. I acted very professionally and prescribed medicine based on his symptoms, but he still refused to leave and asked some stupid questions and started flirting with me. I told him to stop and leave, and he said, "I've wanted to apologize to you for a long time. I didn't want to hurt you, but your sister set me up, made me sleep with her, and then blackmailed me into marrying her or she'd sue me for sexual harassment." I told him to shut up right away because he was talking complete nonsense. I could have called security, but I enjoyed his desperation too much. Felt so good to get revenge. I'll tell you, I had a satisfied smile on my face while I listened to him. He continued, "I know you still love me, which is why you're still suffering and want revenge. To be honest, I'm still sorry about what happened. If you can convince your husband to spare me from prison, I promise I'll leave Carol and become your lover. You don't need to leave your husband, but we can have our own thing in secret." How dare that bastard say that? I couldn't help laughing out loud and called security to get rid of him. He didn't know he was being recorded. The disappointment on his face was so satisfying. He thought he had convinced me. Haha. I texted Carol and tried to send her the recording of her shitty husband. I said, "Your loser husband came to my clinic posing as a patient." She said, "I know, he told me everything. We also know you're still in love with him. If you can keep his license and jail time, I'll let you sleep with him for one night." Her response surprised me. There was no point in talking to her anymore. They were playing this dirty game together. I told my husband about it. He was horrified and said we could sue them for bribery, but that would open up my painful past. I said let him deal with one accusation at a time, but I would retaliate in any way I could. I added Carol Smith, my mother, and other relatives on Facebook. Carol and Smith accepted immediately, perhaps thinking it was a positive sign for me. Then I wrote a long post about how Carol Smith and my mother had tried to manipulate me to help Smith avoid serving time. I attached screenshots of conversations with Carol, converted the audio recordings into still videos, played photos of Smith and Carol in the background, and uploaded the post. The post generated a lot of comments. I blocked Carol Smith and my mom because I knew they would retaliate. My extended family and relatives expressed disgust at Carol's proposal for Smith to date me to get out of the negligence. Carol and Mom tried to contact me, but I blocked the calls and voicemails. I've been reading the comments on the thread yesterday and today, and people have escalated and started attacking Carol and Smith. I couldn't have asked for a better weekend. Now on to the next story. Story 2. Our kid's school bus driver accidentally revealed their secret, and I discovered my wife's year-long extramarital story 3. After I kicked her out, she left him a desperate voicemail. Story 4. My wife and I have been together for 10 years, and we have 2 sons under the age of 6. My wife is very close to her elderly mother and made sure to include her in our family life, even though she lives in a nursing home. We visit her every week and bring her a range of toys for her grandchildren. Soon after, my wife encouraged the children to make gifts for their teachers and bus drivers with the help of their grandmother, and also started taking their mother out sightseeing and spending some one-on-one time together. The routine was that she would pick the children up from the bus and then start getting ready to go out. Over time, she started seeing their mother alone twice a week and every other Sunday with all of us. Even though there was plenty of time, even then, her mother always said how much she missed us. I don't know how that was possible if she kept taking her out, but I just dismissed the idea. One day, my wife ran back into the house, gleefully, after dropping the kids off at the bus. She bounded upstairs, ready to go out with her mother. My son had asked to see a show, So I took my wife's phone off the charger and discovered that the school bus driver for my son had made several missed calls. They both arrived home safely, so I couldn't imagine why there were so many missed calls from him. I tried to call him back, but I discovered that my wife had changed the phone lock. Subconsciously, I downloaded an app on the phone to disguise my number as my wife's. I set the call recording and then dialed my son's phone. As soon as he answered, he said, "Hello, darling. How are you? I promised you a special date. Are you ready?" I hung up as soon as I heard those words. I went upstairs to find my wife getting ready, and she looked stunning. I began to play down how beautiful she looked, and explained that her mother wanted her to be proud of her appearance, no matter the occasion. I played the recording of the bus driver, and her perfume bottle fell from her hands and shattered. She immediately became desperate and begged me to wait a moment so she could explain, but I grabbed the car keys as I walked out the door with the kids. I insisted that she call to pick her up and never bring her back. She was too panicked to cry, just gasping for breath as she said she would find a place to live because her home was with me and the kids. I refused to give up on her. I called the bus driver again, this time on speakerphone. He answered wearily, telling me that he knew what had happened and that he needed to come and pick up my wife because she now belonged to him. He quickly told me to slow down, adding that he was married and didn't want to get involved in any drama. My wife's face turned ugly as she realized how bad her situation was. I just shrugged, hung up the phone, and my wife started redialing his number before I left, to no avail. I heard her leave him a voice message telling him that he needed to come and get her and find her a place to stay because it was all his fault. I think she kept calling him until late at night until she found his wife on social media and publicly begged her to let him call her because she needed to talk urgently. This obviously aroused her suspicions and led her to discover the truth. My wife had been dating and sleeping with her husband for a year, the school bus driver for our kids. I had no idea this had been going on for a year, let alone this long. I feel like a fool for not investigating my wife's whereabouts sooner. I really believed she was spending time with her mother, but she was only there rarely. Her wife slandered my wife's name at school and throughout the town. Her husband was so ashamed and was willing to do anything to get his wife's forgiveness. He disappeared and even stopped using social media. He tried in vain to prove his loyalty to his wife and hoped that everything could return to normal. It was mortifying for any of us. Her lover abandoned her as soon as he got into trouble, and her attempts to seek his help only tore their family apart and landed her in an even worse situation. I also avoided her until a visitation schedule was established and primary custody was granted. Her desperate affair had cost her her reputation, her confidence, and her family. She was never the same again, and I doubt she ever will be. I'm glad I don't have to face life alone because of some stupid mistake that shouldn't have happened, because even after apologizing and explaining to me that his marriage was at a low point when he started seeing my wife, he decided he just needed someone to emotionally support him, and the emotional support turned into physical, and before they knew it, they were living a double life and got caught in the act.